Welcome to the Town of Emmitsburg's Town Workshop for the evening of Monday, February 10th. At this time, I would ask you to please silence your cell phones of any beep, stings, gaming, rings, anything else that might make a noise. And with that, I invite you to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Future meetings include Parks and Recreation meeting, February 11th. It's been changed to
next Tuesday, February 18th, because of the weather.
All right, good to know. It has been changed.
February 18th, yes, because of the coming weather.
February 18th at 7:30 here in the town office.
7th.
Oh.
Is it always 7?
Wait, I thought
we went to 7.
You did go to 7?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We voted for. I had to go back and get the meeting, but they asked for it to go to 7 o'clock, like everyone else has.
But does that? Yeah, I was about to say it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember voting on that.
Well, then it'll be 7:30.
7:30 until it becomes a code change. Okay, so just to reiterate, Parks and Rec, February 18th at 7:30 here in the town office. Planning Commission meeting, February 24th, 7 p.m. here in the town office and on Zoom. And Board of Commissioners meeting is on March 3rd at 7 p.m. here in the town office and on Zoom. At this time, we turn to commissioner comments, starting with Commissioner Hagan.
I got nothing.
Okay, Commissioner Turnquist.
Nothing, thanks.
Commissioner Sweeney.
I also have nothing.
Commissioner Hoover.
Nothing.
The only comment I have is if snow's coming and we have a snow emergency, please move your vehicles off the road for the duration of the snow emergency plan. And with that, I turn it over to Mayor's comments.
Believe it or not, nothing.
All right.
Wow.
Okay. So since this is a workshop, we don't take public comment. However, I just want to briefly go over our agenda items for tonight. So we have 2 that we will be discussing. The first is Ordinance 25-02, amending town code to allow and establish requirements for student housing, and 25-03, amending town code to establish a rental registration program. So having said that, taking our first agenda item, 25-02, establishing student housing. I would like to have a discussion here on the board and get your thoughts and opinions and kind of focus some of our discussion around what is our long-term vision for the Village Zone and Main Street? Is it in the town's best interest to permit student housing in the Village Zone? How does the town benefit from student housing if permitted? And what long-term impacts would student housing have on our town? Now, granted, one could argue that some of those specifics can come after 25-02. However, it's worth a discussion as a board so we know what direction we're moving in, what we see, our vision for the town, and go from there. So, after the last meeting we had regarding student housing, I did a lot of research and looking at many different approaches to student housing. And unanimously, what I saw was that in order to move forward with something like this, especially in a small town, there are many factors that we should consider and consider carefully before we make a decision on how this may look long-term. So we want to consider displacement risks. Would student housing displace our current residents and families, especially those in rental housing? What would be the impact on our housing supply? what would be the impact of our neighborhood dynamics? What would be the impact of our local economy? What would happen with available real estate for businesses in the village zone? Even with our vacant properties, I know we're targeting trying to get those vacant properties filled. What will that look like? And somehow will that be impacted? Infrastructure, parking. We just put in brand new parking meters and we're looking at purchasing additional parking lots. So we know that it's an issue. And also, what is the university's role in partnering with the town when we're considering student housing? Workload for our code enforcement officer. And what kind of conditions or incentives can we put for property owners that might align with the long-term vision of the town? And looking at rental licenses, there are some towns that have a separate rental license and a separate student housing license. And is that something that we should consider instead of just making it all under one generic license or application, I should say. So there are many towns who also put into place, if student housing is allowed, limitations. And they all approach it very differently. But the one thing I found in common is that they all place limitations. So how that looks or how our town wants to approach it remains up in the air. But those are just some starting points of which I wanted to throw out. And from that, I open it up for discussion. Don't everybody jump at once.
I was gonna say, don't make me go first.
You know, well, I mean,
Okay, I have some questions, concerns. I could just start going down the list. I think a number of them are going to be very similar to what Commissioner Bowman Pollitt stated. So I guess if we all have multiple concerns that are identical, then it's probably going to be an issue. So some of my questions are, well, first, I think, and foremost, the most important, do any of our elected officials have rental property here in Emmitsburg?
I can only afford my own house.
Same here.
Yes, I do.
You do?
Nope, I have enough headaches.
You have enough? Commissioner Sweeney?
I do not. No.
Okay.
Yep, nothing in Emmitsburg.
Okay. And then if you do have rental property, do you currently rent to students?
No, my daughter moved out.
Okay. Because that will be important when we do come to the point when we're ready to take a vote. Okay. So my second question is, do we know what the Mount enrollment is and the associated housing needs off campus? For instance, how many students live off campus currently in town? If a resident rents a spare room, is this considered student housing? I think the policy needs to be equitable and in the town's best interest. What is the benefit to the town? Does the town limit paid parking passes in any given year? And we need to think about adding Airbnb/vacation rentals in to the ordinance. I know tourist home is listed under the definitions, but I don't think it's spelled out in the second part of the ordinance. Some concerns are profitability encourages landlords to convert long-term rentals to short-term rentals, which will reduce the overall rental stock. Main Street could become a row of fraternity houses. Complaints of disorderly behavior, noise, litter, drunkenness that we need to keep in mind. It will reduce commercial space availability potentially. Businesses might face challenges if student housing leads to increased noise or disruptive behavior, which could deter other customers. There could be an increased demand for parking from student residents. It could make it harder for businesses and their customers. I don't think we've considered the impact on other residents or a possible impact on property values. Some suggestions, considerations, allow only owner occupied homes to rent a limited number of rooms to students. For example, Gettysburg student housing requires the owner or person responsible of 21 years of age or over to live on the premises. We need to ensure owner accountability. Some localities choose to restrict the total number of permitted units in certain neighborhoods or zoning districts. I know we're only looking at the village zone. We could consider contracts, groundkeeping rules, noise curfews. We should show that there is adequate on-site parking that meets code requirements, show there is an on-site manager or owner present during rental period, limit the number of rooms rented per percent of building rented. We should ensure that student housing and development aligns with the town's broader housing and community goals, encourage a mix of housing types and price points to meet the needs of students and other renters, establish clear guidelines for landlords to follow and set up mechanisms to enforce compliance, include requirements for minimum lease durations to distinguish student housing from short-term rentals, establish enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance with lease requirements. I feel like I already read that. Identify measures to be taken to address potential issues like noise, parking, and infrastructure strain near student housing. And cap the percentage of commercial properties in the business district that can be converted to student housing to preserve space for businesses. That's all for now.
Some of the same things that you were inquiring was what I came across as well. Commissioner Hagan, Commissioner Sweeney, Commissioner Hoover.
I just want to say, doing a lot of it, and I think I'm always torn as a property owner. I never like the idea of people telling me what I can do with my property and who I can rent to and everything. But I don't want to see fraternity row like I went to college in Maryland happen either. So it's that catch-22, and I've seen, and doing the research, I saw two basic ways people are controlling that is the number of unrelated people doing the family member, what we used to always do in law class called the old brothel laws, to come back in and say, or saying, in Pennsylvania, it seems a lot of jurisdictions are doing, you can only do student rentals within so many feet of another student rental. And those distances are all over the place. There's no standard. Some are 700 feet, some are 1,500 feet. There's no standard there. But in our particular instance, the Mount has a large shortage of space on campus. So the students are forced to live somewhere else. And I don't want to hold the students. The last thing I want to see is this, we become in the process of town of kicking students out of their house. I don't want to see that happen. So we have to make sure it's not aimed at them. If we're going down this road, we have to look to the landlord and hold them accountable for everything. I think there's a lot of concern from residents that have reached out, and I've gotten emails. I'm sure some of you have also seen emails from residents stating different concerns and everything out there. And it's a fine line, but I don't want to get locked in that it's just using the term students and going against them. If we're going to regulate this and go down that path, I think we have to say it's only so many unrelated family members can be in a house or dictate it, and just make sure this doesn't creep outside of the village zone. So I think it's a big difference allowing things in an R1 or an R2 district.
So Commissioner Hagan, and I don't mean to,
Go
well,
ahead.
I am going to interject.
Sure.
So this matter is before you on a text amendment request.
Mhm.
And the reason it got here is because of the definition of family in your code, an extant definition, which defines it as either related people by blood or marriage, or up to a maximum of 5 unrelated individuals, provided that they are acting as a single housekeeping unit. That's why we're here. So for student housing, when you have, you know, a group of individual students who are leasing a property with individual leases with their landlord, I would bet you 99% they are not acting as a single family unit. They are paying their own, you know, groceries, they're buying their own sheets, they're, you know, it just doesn't meet the current definition. And so what the applicant has requested is this particular amendment to permit student housing, which could include if your zoning amendments otherwise permit it. See, that's, you always got to go back to the code. So if they otherwise permit it, then they can occupy the premises pursuant to the terms of this resolution or this proposed text amendment. The other thing is that back in the 70s, there was a Supreme Court decision that came down pretty hard on the definition of family and what constituted a family. So a lot of jurisdictions, I mean, things have changed since the 70s, have proceeded to address some of these social changes in their ordinances. So the student housing proposal is to address a specific zone for a specific need. And your other zoning and laws, your other ordinances in Frederick counties, will, you know, they continue to apply. I mean, drunk and disorderly isn't okay if it's in your backyard, you know, if you're affecting or hurting or violating a noise ordinance, that's already illegal. So you have to look at this, or at least I would suggest you look at this. Obviously, you don't have to, but I would suggest that you look at this in the context of all the existing laws that you have, because, and the applicant is here, applicant's counsel is here, and they, you know, they may have a different or an additional perspective on this, but this particular proposal was to address a specific need that we have been informed via Mount St. Mary's, actually, is that they have a housing shortage and people are, you know, get a little extra income. Mr. Ott renovated a property, spent a lot of money doing it. And so, you know, the issue is, where does this fit? And you also have other tools. I mean, if you believe that it should be a special exception rather than simply a permitted use, that's something that you can look at too, because with the special exception, you have to prove that the location of the desired use will not have a greater impact in the proposed location than it would anywhere else in the zone, which gets a little confusing. But what that means is that if, for example, you have student housing that's, you know, I'm having a hard time coming up with something, but, you know, within X feet of a school or something like that. You know, if the impact there is greater because of traffic and worrying about little kids running around, you know, then you can look at it, because if elsewhere in the village zone, it wouldn't have that impact, then you have that ability. Well, actually not you, but your zoning people, specifically your Board of Appeals, has the authority to consider a special exception. So the rental registration unit, which is not the topic of the student housing unit, would also address some of the other concerns that I've heard, you know, just filtering out. So I just wanted to put everything back into perspective for you. And, you know, why we're here, because current code can't do it.
Correct. Exactly. So, I mean, and that's one thing that we heard is it's happening anyway. It's happening anyway.
Well, I'm, you know, I don't know if that's actually the case. I don't know how widespread it is, but
All
You
I'm
know, I
saying
believe
is
it.
prevalence doesn't,
Yeah.
Yeah.
doesn't equal justification.
No, it certainly
I mean-
doesn't. But
I
if it's,
mean,
if you're saying it's happening all over the place anyway, then.
Well, we do have other, you could walk down Main Street and figure out which
Uh-huh.
ones are being rented out to college. I mean, certainly the residents on Main Street could tell you that.
Mhm.
But that's something that I don't want to get caught up in. Commissioner Hagan is, no, I'm not looking to kick anybody out. But at the same time, prevalence doesn't equal justification.
That's
So,
correct.
I mean, going along that train of thought, like, okay, well, no one's paying the parking meters, so let's just make them free, you know? So, and I know that's not what you're saying. I know that's not what you're saying, but I know we've heard it from before.
Good example.
Ms. People, could you come up
If-
to the
yeah.
microphone?
Hi, Brandy Peoples on behalf of the applicant, and I understand that there's really no public comment, but to go to Ms. Powell's comments about the code, the only thing that I would already point out to you guys, and I don't think it's that prevalent now in Emmitsburg, but you already have a fraternity sorority provision in the code that allows them by special exception. And I would submit that since you're already allowing those and you have your visions of Fraternity Row down at University of Maryland, that's not happened here. And the whole idea behind this was to take it as a special exception anyway, so that you're not giving blanket approval, but the onus is on the applicant to demonstrate that one, we can comply with the town codes. We can, and I think I said in a previous hearing that, a lot of leases have provisions that, if a tenant or a student rather is not complying, if there are noise issues, if there are trash issues, those are things that the town could cite the landlord could cite breach of lease, and you can get those people that aren't complying out. So it's not like allowing this is allowing things to happen without a mechanism to correct any problems that you would have. And that's really what I only wanted to say, that the fraternity sorority provision is already there and it's not been abused. And then individual leases would require adherence to local codes.
I believe if they were adhering to local codes, the complaint wouldn't have come into the town in the first place
Correct.
about parking and trash issues. So regardless of what the lease says, complaints still came to the town
I understand.
to resolve those issues.
And if the onus is on the owner, as you were saying, if it's back on the owner, he was already asked by our town staff to comply with code. And from what I understand from our town planner, he continued to rent to students anyway, which at that time, I'm quoting from the last meeting. So, whereas at that time, after the second notice, it was, you can either change it back and be within your zoning, or you can apply for a text amendment. So it sounds really great. Like, we'll put it back on the owner to make sure that they, follow the rules, but that's exactly why we're here. And fraternity and sorority, we're proposing to have that taken out of the code, and it's only by special exception. So,
Well, my retort to that would be, one, do it by special exception and impose conditions upon the landlord, so that if there are complaints, if there are citations, then the town has a mechanism by which we're going to cite you, we'll revoke your special exception, you don't adhere to the lease, we're coming down on you with specific fines. So there are ways we can work with the code to appease everybody's concerns. I understand that there's been complaints, and that's the whole reason why we're here. However, I think that working together, we can come up with a solution that works for everybody. And that's really all I have, other than just to point out the code, and that
Yep.
if you tailor a special exception correctly with imposed conditions, then you have the ability to put pressure on a landlord if he's not enforcing the lease or if he's not adhering to conditions.
right, I would agree with that.
Okay.
I would also be concerned for the amount of work that this puts back on our code enforcement officer. Thank you for your.
You're welcome. Thank
For
you.
your comment. Because it is going to be up to the town to enforce. And what is the process for the complaints? I mean, does it go to the police and then the town? And,
You already have a municipal infraction system in place. And so if there is a complaint, it gets reported, the inspector investigates, and if appropriate, the inspector issues a citation. And then what happens after that is that the alleged violator can either pay the fine or fix whatever infraction it is, or they can elect to stand trial. And they are absolutely permitted to do that. So you've already got your
that
inspection mechanism in
happening?
place.
Are we fining people for noise?
Not for noise, you don't have anything for noise, we do for code violations.
All right.
Your noise would be more related state or county for the noise ordinances.
Well, I mean, that depends because I know there are other people who do put them into here, like,
Because the state will come out and measure the noise and the volume and all that. But
You
the
should have
stores-
I would suggest a blanket noise ordinance, just
Yeah.
applying to the entire municipality if you choose not to adopt Frederick County
right.
would be appropriate.
Well, what I thought was interesting is when looking at Gettysburg, they only allow student housing across the street from the institution, one. And then you have to have like a buffer in between that property and the adjoining property. And there can only be so many within so many feet of each other. But they also have that they're expected to adhere to the college's code of conduct for, as a student out in the community. So, and that's something that I saw even in Mount St. Mary's has a code of conduct, and they have, students are expected to adhere to 24-hour courtesy hours. So I'm wondering what role does, or how can the university partner with us? Because honestly, student housing is not our problem. Let's be honest. It's a Mount St. Mary's issue. So when we're looking at how this is going to affect us as a town, there's been a lot of colleges who try to, there's one example of somebody who realizes how much work this is going to be on a code enforcement officer. I need to find which college it is. I have it written down, and offered to pay part of the salary for the code enforcement officer in town.
So I think, I think you're making a valid point, but I think that we would need to invite Mount St.
Mhm.
Mary's to the table
Correct.
to discuss it. And I don't
Yeah.
believe that's happened. I will say that, the attendance hasn't been great during the comprehensive plan process, which is disappointing, but Mount St. Mary's representative has been there, so they will, I believe, participate. And certainly if an invitation were extended, they could also provide those data points that have been requested,
Mhm.
because I have no idea. I know that at Georgetown, they only guaranteed on-campus housing for freshmen. It was a problem.
So Commissioner, just to give you a little bit of back information, what we've done in the past with Mount St. Mary's relationship. So when we had some problem houses way back when, and we partnered with the Mount and with our two deputies that we had at the time, or three deputies. And if there was a noise complaint of a college, what was known to be a college house, the deputy contacted Mount St. Mary's security, and they met them at that house when they had a complaint, and they started issuing. Mount St. Mary's then started taking names of who students was, and they enforced the code of conduct on them from school, because their code of conduct, as you said, there's 24 hours on campus or off campus required that. So that was a partnership, and it helped quite a bit out. It was a partnership with the town and the Mount that kind of helped neutralize some of those very problem areas. And each year, I think, I don't know what it is today, but each year we always had 2 or 3 houses that was always that house. And probably still the same today. Will always probably be the same. Some few number of houses will have them. But partner with the Mount back then worked very well. Also with the landlord, because there was something in the code where we put a policy in place. I'm not sure town staff may know where it's at or seen it, or if it still exists or not. But if the house had got X number of complaints, I think it was 3 or 4, then that landlord, the property owner, was fined a fee, and I forget the fee was substantial. to encourage them to not have that type of housing going on. But it was just an enforcement mechanism to control and minimize that, in
Correct.
problem areas.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
that's something that I think should be pursued as a partnership with
Yeah.
Mount St. Mary's.
And everybody has changed since then, at the Mount and.
Well, but Commissioner
part of it.
Hoover makes a good point. I mean, the school can enforce its code of conduct, period,
And they
you
did,
know, and they do.
they did it
And,
then.
and so that is also another mechanism that doesn't involve town resources to get people to straighten up and fly right, so to speak.
Because Gettysburg goes as far as to say, or no, it was Towson that said frequent complaints will result in the students meeting with the Student Accountability and Restorative Practices Department at the university. So and
When they started taking students' names down, particularly,
and that they would be,
particularly
yeah.
Sports athletes' names down,
It is, and they
it
get
quieted
those.
it quieted them down quick.
Well, and then Gettysburg goes, I mean, some of these towns that I'm looking at go as far as to say that if there's repeated issues at the house, we're going to revoke your rental registration.
And I agree with something that it should certainly be under a Board of Appeals approval process. Currently in the code, it does require boarding houses already has that requirement that it has to get Board of Appeals special exemption for it. That's not recommended here on paper anyway, but I certainly believe we should recommend that. And then I think we should have a certain certain requirements that they have to meet, or at least some strong suggestions of what they have to meet. And then the Board of Appeals can enforce that for whichever zone. Right now, the way it is written, and I've told you wrong back here, this code or this change would allow it in student housing within only village zone at the moment. But I think it should definitely put in section 17.32.060 that it requires special exception for Board of Appeals in addition to just being an approved use.
And that's something that's certainly in the board's discretion
It's
to
not- I
consider.
mean, since boarding house is already in that is it requires, I mean, why would,
Special
to
exception
me, I see
by
them both the same, Board of Housing or Student Housing, same thing as
Board of Appeals or by Planning Commission.
Board of Appeals.
Yes, the Board of Appeals has exclusive jurisdiction over special exceptions and
Right.
variances.
I think that a special exception is good,
Should be,
but when you said specific, what did you say?
has specific guidelines of which the board has to say, what do they meet? Do they meet, if you want X number of feet from another unit or X
Right.
number of feet from a school or whatever, the other things I heard here, those kinds of things, then between the town staff, the attorney, the board and maybe the applicant or applicants come up with what makes it a good long-term fit.
Mhm.
That's, I don't think we're hit all at the same, all at once. I don't think we get them all at the same, the first time, but at least there'd be something in there to start it, to say, these are the big ones,
Mhm.
and I think something should certainly be put in place, or at least we attempt to put in place a relationship with the Mount to where when we have complaints or we have known issues and problems, that we have their security with our deputies kind of work together
Mhm.
and try to foster a better relationship for the community or whoever.
Mhm.
But that's my biggest thing at the moment is that it absolutely falls under a special exception with certain guidelines and requirements.
Yeah, and you're
That's my
certainly
biggest-
allowed to do that. I mean, you can require on-site parking. You can require certain, trash
Right.
containers or things like that that are not typical in a regular residential community. I mean, those are all things that you could do. But really, this came about to address
Particular issue,
a particular issue.
which most text amendments do.
Exactly.
Right, but to address a particular issue, there's gonna be, like,
Has a lot of issues.
Well, your code respectfully could use a little bit of dusting off and.
yes, there's plenty of things that need to be, that's something we should ask our town operations specialist to,
She's already started.
perfect. But, because I know one of the things was that was already proposed to us was fraternities and sororities that we were taking that out, but needless to say,
There's a couple things I can address if you'd like me to, just because I'm old and lived here a long time and did do a little research on some of these things because I kind of anticipated what might come up. Student housing has been in Emmitsburg since the early 1960s, because when we moved into our house on Main Street, the lady next door to us, Mrs. Allisberger, rented rooms to college students. So it's been something that has happened since back in the 1960s. And I did talk to businesses to see what their increase of businesses, their restaurants, grocery stores, things like that. And they see a 20 to 25% increase during the school year with college students. So does have an impact on our businesses. The Fraternity Row thing, I don't think our Main Street is designed that it would make a good fraternity row. Not like Carlisle Street in Gettysburg. That's something where you can make a movie, because it looks like Fraternity Row with a funeral home sitting in the middle of it. Monahan's funeral home was right in the middle of Fraternity Row. I don't know how that happened, but it's there.
Fraternity rows is the easy one though.
Yeah,
Just make it a certain size dwelling unit,
yeah,
That's
um,
minimum size.
yeah. Fire rescue and police responses, they are tripled, at least tripled at non-student rental properties around town. We have about 5 or 6 rental properties that students do not live at, that on a weekly basis are getting fire, rescue, police responses compared to student housing. Let's see. The Mr. Ott's property that kind of brought this all to the forefront, to be fair, this was in the middle, this all happened in the middle of our code enforcement and town planner change, to where the 2 people that were here doing those, they left to take other positions. And that really made this very muddy, because we don't know the whole story of everything and how this all came about. And just the other thing, because I only saw one letter that, thank you for forwarding that, because I didn't get that from the complainant. But I think some of these complaints are more of a complainant owner disagreements and feuds as to really being a big problem. So that's what I got to offer.
one thing that I will say in response to that is, again, prevalence doesn't equal justification, but our economy, while it picks up during the school months, also suffers if we have an overpopulation of students compared to a balance on our village zone. We do have, their business drops in the summer months. I mean, we saw that with Gettysburg Smoothie. And also the letters that I received from the residents don't necessarily, are you saying that is basically just on one property? Because some of the things they say, like we have reports of, public urination on people's houses and excess trash and parking violations. So, and it came, I mean, I have 2 letters right here. And a lot of their concerns aren't necessarily with disruption per se as the long-term effect it may have. We do have one here from Gail Fowler and Alan Rogers, who make a good point. They purchased a property that was once supposedly rented out by the room, and she outlines in detail how, first of all, it wasn't even up to code, so it provided an unsafe environment, so rental registration And inspections, I think, are something that we need to pursue. She said that the property that they purchased was advertised by the previous owner as previously used as student housing and can generate 60K and a year in rental income with potential for more. And then goes on to say if there had been an ordinance that legitimately allowed a single family home to be converted into student housing, who wouldn't do it? So that's where we do, as Commissioner Hoover says, need to look at what percentage in the village zone do we want? What limitations can we put on it? Because if it just becomes anybody in the village zone can do it, who's to say, somebody's not going to buy up one of the vacant businesses and turn it into essentially student dorms? Or what is the incentive for long-term residents living on Main Street or South and North Seaton when they could be making that kind of money? So, and also the concern that they brought up with that it could drive up the rental rates for people who want to be long-term residents here. With those kind of numbers.
So if you look at the draft text ordinance, it does address some things. So for example, for student housing, the maximum occupancy per bedroom is 1.
Right,
One
how do we
human.
enforce that? I mean,
So-
does the applicant have one person per bedroom right now?
I can't speak to that.
There's one per, okay. So, I mean, that's something that I think would also be very hard to enforce.
Well, I don't know, because usually with people come cars. And if you can't park all those cars on site, I mean, on that property,
Uh-huh.
then there's a problem. And again, basically, no municipality is big enough and no municipality wants to be, the occupancy police. And so when you look at complaints like this, which is why you have these, why you have a trash ordinance, why you have parking meters, when people aren't paying, then they clearly need to be punished for it. But you have mechanisms, and understand, I'm just trying to provide an overview. I'm not trying to tell you what to do in any way. All right.
Yeah, we understand.
Yeah. So, but when you look at the specific language of this proposed text amendment, it's 1 parking spot, 1 person per bedroom, and you can have trash requirements, you can have on-site trash, receptacles, on-site parking, all those things can be addressed if this is the direction that you choose to go in. And that's really your big issue, as I see it.
Wait a minute now. It does not require the parking is not covered for student housing. So that would be under the normal village zone requirement as it's written today.
Now, well, there is no student housing provision today, but if you look
But
at
if we
paragraph
But
7,
if we accept this, if we accepted this today, I know that's not going to happen, but the student housing doesn't have it does not have its own parking regulation requirement. It would be village zones requirement.
so your village zone requirements are still going to apply. Okay,
Correct.
those don't go away. But if you look at paragraph 7 on page 7, it says 1 spot per student. So it's there. But the reason we're having this workshop is so we can figure out, what other criteria
You're
you
correct.
think would be appropriate to include.
So student housing must be able to meet the requirement of 1 parking space on site. It doesn't say that.
It does.
I
Right.
know I see it, but where does it say on site? 1 space for each bedroom? Because one of the advertisements online said, oh yeah, we have 3 on site, but there's also 7 available on North Seaton.
The following are minimum off-street parking requirements for
Yeah.
specific uses. So they require 1 off-space parking for each.
Otherwise, no one can hear you.
Yeah, basically what Ms. Willis is going to say, that's addressed in subparagraph D at the very top of the page.
Mhm.
It has to be off-site or
She said.
off-street, excuse
You
me.
don't want to repeat that into the microphone?
I can now that I'm here. It is a requirement of off-street parking. So they're required to have one space per bedroom.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the things we wanted to make sure we addressed in this ordinance.
Okay.
And then do we
Thank you.
not sell parking permits?
We do sell
The
parking
students-
permits to
the
anybody that
students?
wants them. We have 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and a year.
Well,
We
then
have
that
plenty
takes
of them
up space
available.
For commercial businesses.
I'm sorry,
Then that would take us parking space that could be used by a commercial business.
but they're required by this code that anybody has to have one space per bedroom. That doesn't mean that a student couldn't go buy a parking permit and park on the street. Anybody, you don't even have to live on Main Street to buy it. You could buy a parking permit. And we have plenty because nobody buys them.
Well, that was something that was brought up by a resident as far as, is there a need to, in the future, look at limiting paid parking passes? Because, I mean, if everybody bought a parking pass, which is good, but then it kind of negates the point of having metered parking to have space turnover for businesses.
Correct, but we actually don't sell many parking permits. So
Not yet.
not yet. You're right, not yet. So that is a question.
Yeah.
Consideration.
Something to consider. Something to keep your
But,
eye on.
but here again, we have to remember this, like here again, student housing has been here since 1960. So it's not like it's never been here and all of a sudden we're going to flip a switch and we're going to have busloads of students coming to live in town. So it's been here. So the problems that we've had or that we're anticipate having, we've already had those problems because they're here. The students are here.
Right, hence the complaints. I mean, we have another letter from Teresa and Carrie Shorb, who said they recognize we're in a college town. That doesn't mean we're in support of rampant destructive or disrespectful student invasion of our little town. We've seen and heard their late night parties with loud music, vulgar language, beer pong. There are elderly folks on Main Street who have been here 85 years or more who don't even enjoy an evening on their back porch due to the noise of parties. And of course, yes, this comes to like filing complaints and calling the police and all of this. But it does, and maybe with continued enforcement, we can get those properties under control, but it doesn't sound like that's what's happening right now.
Well, this is also a letter from one, I mean, in a court, which clearly we're not there, but that would be, well, where's the support for these statements? Right? And I'm just putting it out there, and it's nice that the Shorbs are writing. But the one thing that really concerns me right now is that a lot of us have absolutely no idea what those letters say because they haven't been included in a separate. I mean, do you have them? Okay, because those kind of things should go to staff so that they can address that when they're working on these things.
Well, I think one of these was, I know this one went to Mayor Davis. Did that
that's-
not go?
No, it
staff?
didn't. Yeah, no, things like this have to go to staff.
I think you sent it to me. I think you sent it to me. I wasn't. I think you just went to
Right.
the commissioners.
Right. Well,
Yeah, this is just a point of order. Yeah.
okay. Well, needless to say, I can, some of these went to all the commissioners, some of these went to Mayor Davis. I will make sure that Angela gets a copy of them and it's along with Miss Willits. But anyways,
Hey, You got a question,
oh,
comment?
Just to kind of recap some of the history of this, and I think I can't recall which hearing it was that we were here. I believe we were here in
October. I think.
October and November. There was intense discussion about having this as a special exception process. And the thing, I don't know how many of you guys sit on the Board of Appeals or watch those hearings, but they're publicized, they have public comment. So the people that are raising these types of issues, if I am an applicant and I want to apply for student housing, I have to make sure that I don't have any more noise than a house in the same district as Ms. Powell said. I have to make sure that I'm not a disruption. I have to make sure, like, I have to meet all these statutory criteria to establish that I have a special exception. And things like traffic and parking and trash receptacles are discussed. And at one of the meetings, we went into great detail about, let's require the applicant to have certain types of trash receptacles on site, outside. And when we talk about parking, we're talking about off-site or on-site parking, not street parking, but on-site parking requirements for these students. So the student housing that we're talking about is self-contained and really limited to specific properties that can meet the statutory criteria. If you can't provide off-site or on-site parking, that's a problem, and then you wouldn't be able to meet the criteria that the statute has. So my suggestion, and it's not something that you have to consider tonight, and maybe this is a dialogue, and we even put provisions in the code of the special exception to reach out to, the Mount St. Mary's College and see how we can work with them in creating these terms that afford the town the protections that it wants without compromising a property owner's right to do what he wants with his property. I think there can be a marriage between the two if we're creative about it and incorporate it into the code so that you have your assurances that things are the way they're supposed to be. And if they're not, it's a code violation. The owner gets cited and then you have recourse. As it exists now, there is no provision. So when you're hearing about these students having parties in beer pong, people are calling the police, but there's no real true regulation by which the town can say, you can't have student housing in that house. And I think that's the difference. So if we think about the special exception route, we have control. It goes before the board. You hear the public comment, you hear the public complaints. And I think that's just something I wanted to make sure that the board was aware of. It's not just, oh, you can have student housing. It's a methodical and articulate process by which these houses are approved. And that's really all I want to say.
Understood. I mean, and that's something that I think still needs to be fleshed out because
I agree. I think that's really where I get to the next step here is to find what would those provisions be? Because without knowing what they are,
right.
how well do we like or dislike the ordinance? I think
Right.
I think maybe if we make our next step to be establish some provisions
Mhm.
as a special exception
Mhm.
and have this code written, have a part put in here that this requires special exemption from Board of Appeals.
Yeah, somehow we started out with a special exception and we wound up over here. And I honestly think, I think it may have come from the board. I'm not sure.
To pull it,
About switching from a permitted use or from a special exception use to a permitted use, but the application came in as an either or application. So right now, I think what staff needs is direction from you so that it can, look at this in the context of the whole code
mhm.
and, address what you would like to see. And then it would go to public hearing and, blah, blah, blah.
Because it would still be a permitted use, but then the permitted use like boarding house currently has,
It would be a
Uh,
special exception.
it requires special exception. And I think if at this point, if we maybe have staff or whomever, whatever, draft some special exemptions of what we discussed here tonight and whatever other things that the board and the mayor and whoever else comes up with, we review those and settle on, are they good? Are they gonna get us any closer to this?
Is it possible to reach out to Mount St. Mary's too, so that we could get input from them, we being staff? Because I think that would be very helpful.
I think that would be a necessary step,
Yeah.
honestly,
Mm.
because if we're going to allow student housing by special exception or in the village zone or however we want to allow it, then we need to have a good partner with our university. And, what part do they play in
And I think.
in
the best-
supporting us? Because honestly, we're absorbing the fact that they don't have enough housing. So how do they support us in that process? There was another really good suggestion from what, bringing the college, some colleges realize that students are, in a small town and then they try to push the college in, like, what services do they offer here in town? Like, do they put the bookstore down on Main Street? So they, drive more businesses down that way. Like, there's ways that,
It's a big economic engine.
it's huge. And, I think a lot of that outside of this discussion could be explored. How can they be a good partner with our town? Sorry, were you going to say something, Commissioner Hoover?
Probably, but I forgot.
Oh, I'm sorry. I talked too much. Okay.
I'll try and remember. I'm old too.
I promise, can I make one more comment? Then I'm gonna unplug my microphone, I promise. To address the businesses downtown, President Trainer, who just recently left, that was one of his goals. They were actually trying to purchase a property here in town to bring in a gift shop and a bookstore to one of the properties here in town and have apartments and rentals in the other part of the building. And unfortunately, he left. And we haven't had an opportunity to sit and meet with the new president because of some things he has going on. And we just didn't push our way in and say, we need to meet you now. He has some other issues that are going on. And while we have the 2 or 3 letters from citizens that have some concerns, and I agree with what they're saying, we're not mentioning the several hundred positive things, comments we got from the citizens during snowstorms about the students helping with snow removal, during trick or treat when all the houses were out handing out candy to the kids. And we got such a positive feedback from the citizens on that. So to be fair to the students, and trust me, not everything that happens in this town, even though we have a few people that say all the students, it's not always the students. I mean, living on Main Street, I know the characters, I know the players, and it's not always the students. So I'm unplugging, I'm done, I promise.
At this point, if you could just give us some guidance.
Yeah. So, where do we want to give guidance as far as reaching out to Mount St. Mary's, find out how they can support us in this process? And then go ahead.
I was gonna say, have town staff and attorney come up with at least a beginning of those special exemptions. What would that look like?
Well, and also what would you like us to include? I mean, I know we've got the on-site parking for sure. We've
Sure.
got the trash receptacles for sure. We've got already occupancy limits, in terms of per bedroom.
I think you should also put on there just a dwelling unit size, some kind of, I don't know what the size is, but square footage wise, how big is that dwelling unit that you can do it in?
So,
Because that would help restrict the amount of, from having.
Yeah.
yeah,
So many in a
I
row.
hear what you're saying. Yeah, well, you have, you can have an apartment building and then whatever's going on in the apartment. And
Right.
some of this stuff is going to get addressed in a rental
Mhm.
registration program, right? But when we look at, would it be helpful for you to have sort of like a little description of what is permitted in the village zone in terms of residential occupancy?
I think anything that you provide would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's already in the code.
I mean, yeah.
Well,
just
it
in
is, but going
code,
on an Easter egg hunt can be a little
Right.
challenging.
I think we
Agreed.
as commissioners could also, provide a list of ideas,
Yeah, that'd be great.
rather than hashing them out right now.
Yeah, because then we
Agreed.
could come back with, because what I'm hearing from this board is it needs to be a special exception if we're going to do this. Okay, we got that. All right. So then, when you look at the special exception criteria in your code, and there are criteria for special exceptions already, what Najila could do is just send you what those criteria are now. And if we could get just some input on what else specific to this particular use you would like to see, if you can just you know, and then we can come back with, you know, like a cafeteria option. Yes, no, yes, no.
I like that.
I like that too. My question is, I know we're looking at this specific special exception, but also if something were to come before the Board of Appeals, and we obviously, part of what we want to see in that, you know, where does it come into play as far as limitations or percentages or the number that we want to allow? I know that doesn't necessarily have to pertain to this particular special exception, but in general, if this comes, a lot of people come and say, you know, I want this special exception. And they meet and they check off all the boxes. Do we just allow every single one?
Well, I think one of the check off boxes probably is the proximity from one to another. So if there's a distance between them, then every house can't be one. So, I mean, but
Yeah, so maybe we look
It
at,
has to be
is it
codified.
100 feet, 500 feet or whatever?
It has to be codified. So
think-
there's already standards that they have to apply, right?
Mhm.
So if you want specific criteria that are considered only in connection with student housing, we need to put it in your ordinance.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that though, that at a certain point, you have to look at practicality. I mean, Emmitsburg only has so much VZ space,
Right.
right? You know, and if you wanted to consider student housing and, oh shoot, I am so sorry. I thought I turned
I'll
my
let you
phone
know.
off. That's so embarrassing.
That just saved us $200.
Yeah. That took 2 minutes and I do not charge you that much an hour. I will argue on that point. So, yeah, but in any event, now I've completely lost my train of thought.
You were saying practicality, there's only
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, you've got only so much geographical space.
Mhm.
And, you know, and you do have businesses. And the other thing to keep in mind is we cannot legislate for everything.
Right.
Because just as your code provisions may have been appropriate 30 years ago or 20 years ago, times change. And so we can't, you know, we don't have a crystal ball. We can only deal with what we got now.
Right.
So we could try to incorporate those concerns into the criteria
Mm-hmm.
in order to approve a special exception.
Right.
Yeah.
We can set up the parameters.
Yeah.
Or at least attempt to.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and then we can look at them and say, you know, as I said, make your little cafeteria list, but because what I'm hearing from you are concerns that go to kind of groups of issues.
Mhm.
And we could also point out, well, that's already addressed in code provision, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then we can have that available for you because really the complaints, you know, they're driven by people.
Mhm.
So.
Right. Okay.
So that's what I like to say. To
So,
have that come back and then we rehash it.
I mean, I like the idea of coming back, you know, let's put the ground rules down and some things that we're all interested in seeing down there is, you know, if we're saying, hey, they have to be so many feet apart, separated, they have to, or you want to say you can't go over, you know, somebody can't be turned into a 30-bedroom, you know, it's a 4-bedroom house, can't convert it to 30 bedrooms.
The International Building Code has specific requirements with respect to what can constitute a bedroom.
Right.
And so it's got to have windows. It has to have ingress and egress. I do believe there might even be a square footage criterion. So, you know, that's that we've already got that.
so that's like trying to prevent people from turning a garage into a bedroom and, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, the garage may fall into the ADU category if it's got plumbing, but, you know, for example, a bedroom, there's no exit, an attic. You know, the ceiling heights don't meet the IBC criteria, it doesn't meet the bedroom criteria.
Mhm.
That's already addressed.
Mhm.
And you know, I don't want to start the conversation about the rental registration yet, but some of those issues will be addressed in your rental registration because it does require an inspection. And if
Correct.
you don't have a safe path of travel,
Mhm.
you don't get your registration.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, that's why you kind of have to have both of them.
Will be nice. Make sure we write them out.
What?
The amounts it varies is in with us on the criteria that we need, that
Yep.
we want to enforce too. So
Yeah, oh, yes.
they might have some they want to put with it too. So
Yeah, it might, yeah, I can pick their brain as well. Do we have enough guidance to move forward on that? Is that enough? Because I know that we said we were going to follow up with things that we would like to see.
I think that if you follow up with that, I mean, I was busily taking notes while you were outlining your, your global concerns. And so if you follow up with Najila, if you have any, little brainstorms that say, oh, well, how about if we do this and it'll solve this problem, then
Okay.
that would be helpful. And then you can schedule another workshop. We can give you another draft. And then really try to, make your cafeteria selections. And then come back with something that you are interested in pursuing at a public hearing and adoption level.
Okay. Sounds good. Moving on from that agenda item then, we have enough guidance? Ms. Powell, are we good?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Or, no, I mean, do we feel like we have
I've got
enough
a
direction?
I've got a framework.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll send additional,
That
we
would be great.
wanted to go directly to Najila and Ms. Willits.
Yeah, that should
Okay.
go directly to them. And then
Okay.
also if you could forward the letters of concern from the
Yep.
public.
Yep.
So we have an idea of what we should be looking at to address.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Any other thoughts before moving on to agenda item number 2? I can't even see without my glasses on. Agenda item number 1, and where did it go? I lost it. Hang on. Agenda item number 2 is related to ordinance 25-03, amending town code to establish a rental registration program. I mean, we kind of mentioned the rental registration many times during the previous discussion. I do think the consensus of the board was that some kind of rental registration should be, that we don't currently have that, and we need to look at it, not just for the village zone, but for all rentals. I need to find it though. Hang on. I lost it.
Well, while you're looking, I'm taking my mic back because we're on different subjects. So I only shut it off for one thing.
What?
But-
You used your talking chips, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm kidding.
And I want to be honest with you, up until recently, I was against this because I felt that it was the government trying to reach too much into people's personal properties. But we have several properties in town that we can get no help with making them safe, cleaning them up, making sure the neighbors are safe. And after reading this several times, this document will make that happen. And they're big concerns. And in case you didn't know, I had a little fire background. And that is my big concern, because when we have a fire in Emmitsburg, it has the potential to take blocks, not just one house. It's not a farmhouse sitting out on 30 acres. It has the potential to take blocks. And we have several of those buildings in town that need to be addressed. And we've tried to do it through the county. We've had fire marshal, we've had building inspectors, we had health department, we had animal control. We had anybody that would listen to us from the county, and they go, oh my, you have a problem, but there's nothing we can do about it. So they threw it back on us and told me, they said, you can condemn it. I go, yeah, I'll just go out and start condemning buildings since you're going to have my back. They're not going to be there at all for us to help at all. And this document will make that happen. So.
I do see we had an update right before the meeting. I haven't had a chance to look over it.
What I did was, and I apologize for the late notice, but what I did was go back and try to use, or have us use, terms that are already defined instead of making up new terms. So these, what I try to do is link everything back, and I know that Najila did too, is to link things back to either already existing defined terms such as dwelling unit. And then when we define new terms, we're not just doing it for recreational purposes. We're actually using them in the, in the ordinance itself. And so that was one of the purposes. And then the other was to make clear, what some of these requirements are, because, now when a house is built, you don't get to use an occupancy permit unless it meets code. But, if you're renting property to, unsuspecting people that, hadn't, hasn't been updated or is, in a basement, for example, this gives you the mechanism to make it a safe place, or they just don't get to make the money off of it, and I understand that people rent rooms to make ends meet and do things. But again, just as with the student proposal, your underlying zoning ordinance and criteria continue to apply. This addresses the fact that this is kind of like a health and safety proposal almost.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because like one of the letters that went to the mayor commissioners, which I will forward, that was one of her concerns, was that this was being used for a rental and the windows were painted shut and they had padlocks on each of the bedroom doors. That was, yeah, she said it was kind of creepy. There was, they were using space heaters and they were exposed cables as extension cords, which is basically, there was no way it would have passed a home inspection, which is why you couldn't get a loan for it. But needless to say, person was making $60,000 a year on it with people living and taking advantage.
They're being taken advantage
of in an unsafe condition. I mean, my sister rented off-campus housing when she was up at Penn State, and it was so in disrepair that the toilet fell through the second floor right into the living room and almost killed her roommate. So it happens.
So
Go ahead.
So my question about this now, I haven't read it all in detail
Sure.
exactly, but I've breezed through it a little bit. But what I want to make sure of or ask is to understand it. So as you just said about codes and things of that nature. So if you have a house and it met code, of course, when it was built, it hasn't been modified, it hasn't been changed, and they're renting that property. So we're going to go in there every, I forget, was it annual? Biannual, wasn't it? Every 5. Okay. So if we go in there and if there are no real major modifications, I mean, it met the code when it was, built or what have you. There've been no major modifications. So are we saying this allows us to go in there and say, well, there was an electrical code change or a plumbing code change or a whatever code change? Did they have to upgrade that house at that moment?
So that's a great question.
continue
And
renting it?
because the way we've written it is that there's a 6-month hiatus for people who have rental units that are not compliant with the current IBC requirements.
Okay.
But during that 6-month period, they would bring it up to code. I mean, because this is a business.
I agree. But,
Right.
okay, so we give them that 6 months and then, but let's say, and we pass them at that point. So 5 years later, we go do another inspection and the code has changed.
No, that's a
No
good
matter how
point.
big or small that code change
Yeah.
is, but the code has changed, but no major modification was done. So typically in the code, in the building permits, they'd be grandfathered. So that's my question here. Are they?
I would think that it would have to comply with current code requirements. And, honestly speaking, that area is pretty regulated already.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, obviously it can change.
Right.
There's no question, but that's a fine question that you've raised. I mean, I think that there are minimum health safety requirements that have to be met.
Yeah. I mean, because today I agree, if you've got some houses, then there's some houses here that are rental properties and that don't, that didn't meet it when they started renting them.
Mhm.
And there've been nothing there to
It
catch
hasn't
that.
gotten any better.
Right, it hasn't gotten any better. And there are a lot of many old houses in town, which, that are never going to meet that code for the type of housing we have today, the codes we have today. But regardless, like I say, typically there's no major modification to the building. They don't require a code, they don't require a upgrade to continue to stay with the code. So I just think that would need to be clear in here.
Yeah, no, that's a
What
good
that,
point.
what that means is that if no changes were made and the code has changed, they are or they are not exempt of the new latest and greatest code at that moment. I just think that needs to be clear in here.
Yeah, well, and I
So,
think that we could use some direction from the board as to how you'd like us
I
to.
think the first inspection should probably say, you shall be up to today's current standards.
Yeah, and it does, and it gives, as I said, that 6-month window
Yeah,
to address it, and then you also have to look at, once again, going back to your underlying zoning criteria. I mean, because if a house becomes so rented, so for example, that it becomes a boarding house and they didn't go for a special exception, then, you still have to comply with those rules.
right. But this is for all rentals. So if I take my own personal house and I decide to rent it, which would never happen, don't worry. But that's a single
Yeah,
family
then you
dwelling
have to
unit.
register.
And it would get registered. And unless I'd made a major change in that home, there would not be, normally would not be a reason for me to upgrade the code to plumb
Unless
in
you're
the
gonna use it
electric,
as a basic-
sprinklers or whatever it may be.
Well, and that's the point. I mean, because sprinkling is now required.
Right.
you
And
know.
that could put a problem with this if they're required to come up to all codes.
Well, and sprinklers are
Like-
there for a reason.
I know why they're there.
Yeah. We
was-
can get Mr. Davis to
I
talk
was,
about
I was the mayor,
that.
I was the mayor and we enforced it.
Yeah,
so-
so, I mean, so those are really good points. But
So-
we've said in this draft that it has to meet current IBC standards for
Okay.
whatever particular type of dwelling it is, because there are different, I mean,
Right.
they're all
Doesn't matter what
treated
it is, whether
differently,
it's, whether
right?
it's single family or multi-dwelling or
Duplexes
whatever.
or towns or whatever.
Sprinklers may be something that makes a real big issue across the board,
Right.
cost wise.
Right.
To bring it into, single family house is one cost, but if it's a multi-dwelling unit,
I need to go back and look at the IBC.
Yeah.
I think normally what happens with fire in the building code, there's a couple things that can dictate what you do. If you change type of occupancies.
Mhm.
So if you go from, take your house
mhm,
and start to rent it, well, then you're required to have a different type of smoke detector and
Mhm.
things like that. You're probably required to have fire extinguishers.
Carbon
Right.
monoxide.
Yeah, carbon monoxide, to where they're a good thing to have in your
Because
own
now- 'cause now it's-
house, but
'cause
you're
now
not
it's-
really required to have them.
but
So-
now it's commercial.
Right, so that changes. And when it comes to an existing apartment building, for example, there's a percentage of renovation that you have to do before it has to come up to code. Mr. Ott, I hate to use his
He's far-
example, but
He's far exceeded that.
yeah, well, so his was probably at 80%
Right,
renovation. Well, he had to bring it up to the current code.
right.
That house is sprinkled. It has a fire department connection to it outside that we can hook in to support that sprinkler system. So it's probably the safest house in the village zone right now. But if he would have only put new windows in and a fresh coat of paint, he wouldn't have had to sprinkle and things like that. So it depends upon the amount of renovation.
And that's why I'm asking that question,
Right.
because had he just put new windows in and whatever, he wouldn't have that sprinkler and whatever. Now he's going to rent it. Does he have to go get sprinklers? Because of this,
It's a different use. What you have to apply, every
Right.
time you change a use, you have to go back
right?
and make another application, and then that's going to get tested by the county to see if it
Right.
meets.
I would agree if it's a change of
criteria.
use. I agree if it's a change of use, but if it's not a change of use, Mr. Odd, let's say he's already in business, already renting and whatever, prior to the sprinklers and whatever. So just say,
Right. well,
not
but
change
then-
of use, but just now that we're enforcing this
Mhm.
on
It
the
would
ex-
require currency.
on the existing home or whatever it is, whatever type of business it is.
Right, because our sprinkler code here in town does not apply to existing buildings. So 90% of our, unfortunately, 90% of our apartment buildings are not sprinkled.
Right. But this may require it.
No,
That's my question.
If it's in the IBC, it does. I mean, it depends on what Frederick County does. We're taking, because we don't have our own IBC. We don't have,
Right.
because we don't
Right.
issue building permits.
Right.
So it's whatever Frederick County requires is the minimum baseline.
Requires today,
Correct. Or
not the
if
not
you
the date that they
choose-
started doing rental property.
No, right.
So you're bringing everything
To
back up
current
to code
Current code,
as of today.
which could be a
That's what this is
massive
for.
expense.
yeah, but it's not gonna, I don't think that.
Well, it's a
enforceable.
choice, right?
Well,
We,
then,
we would close down half our
then
buildings.
you need to, that's why I'm bringing it up. You're gonna need to review,
99.9%.
you're gonna need to, you're gonna need to reevaluate
We
just
would-
for that
we would-
reason.
We would
Mhm.
close down half our buildings.
That's why I'm bringing it up. You know, how stringent are we making it?
Well, again, this is only.
And,
for
and like I say, I haven't read the
residential.
whole thing really that in detail, but, you know, if it's going to enforce major upgrades
For
for code
residential,
issues,
for rental properties.
Yeah.
you know, the
Well-
whole
Well, for
rental.
major upgrades, yes, but
No,
if,
no, I'm saying,
No,
but say schoolhouse apartments. We can't go into schoolhouse apartments and onto Paul Street and put this into place and say, you've got to sprinkle that.
you got 6 months.
Yeah, you
Well,
can't do that.
that's,
But why not?
Because they're grandfathered in by the state law, by county and state laws. That, well, I guess we could, but I
You
don't
could.
think we want to
well,
because that
So
would shut down all of our apartment buildings in town.
all
how
of
do
them.
we determine who's grandfathered?
Well, it's just like, Mr. Existing, existing is
Would
what's
be,
existing now, all of the homes. Somebody built, is your house sprinkled? You
Hers-
got in before that. If your neighbor builds a new house, probably the house that burnt down the street from you, it's probably, should be sprinkled now.
so Pembroke was.
Because
not
any
Brookfield was.
new house that is built in the town of Emmitsburg has to be sprinkled.
Frank, but let's say, that- and I'll use the odds, he's done a great job in the renovation now, okay? He passes the initial, thing. We got 5 years comes, he's got to do his next, passes then. So we're now 10 years out, he comes up for the next inspection, building codes have changed and something. And let's say, all of a sudden they've decided you have to have halon dispensers in your home. Is he required to do that now?
That's the question on the table.
Yeah, I don't believe so because no existing buildings had to sprinkle when the sprinkler code went in. Believe it or not, Dollar General, it was just built, 5 years ago, is not sprinkled because they stayed under the square footage. They stayed under the square footage by like 20 square feet. And of all places that should be sprinkled, Dollar General. But it's not because of the fire code.
Nobody's-
So the town fire code goes by the county and state.
Right. But if you're getting into those codes and one of the big concerns, at least for me in this, is making sure the places are habitable. And,
Right.
The renters aren't getting ripped off because you're in a
Agreed.
hard place. You got to take what you can get.
Agree 100%.
And it's there. So it's, if I don't have to do anything, if my house was built in 1927 and I don't need running water back then, and it's always an exception.
Then it's a non-conforming use. And the whole goal behind non-conforming things is to make them current, to bring them current.
Mhm.
But it sounds like we're going to pick and choose what issues we intend to bring current, like the sprinkler system, because your house was built during this year, you don't have to put sprinklers in. If electricity wasn't required when your house was built in the 1900s, does that mean we're going to let that one go by the wayside as well?
No.
I think we need minimum requirements for like fire detectors, egress,
Mhm.
windows that open or windows in each bedroom, or, I mean, I think
Well,
there would need
that's-
to be
yeah,
minimum
that's in the code.
standards, but
Yeah,
we can
that's
talk
pretty well
about,
But-
written here.
But that is an existing code, regardless of your,
Well,
you
and
have to
yet-
have an egress, an
but
emergency.
it might
exit.
not have been in the code when the house was built,
Mm.
like sprinklers. So
I'm just,
I think part of this goes to the density of occupancy also. I mean, because, when does a dwelling unit become a multifamily or not a multifamily housing? Right? What's the tipping point? You've got a one-off with one person renting one bedroom versus somebody who turned the house that you were talking about,
Mhm.
into who knows how many units.
Right.
And, and if that was done in a zoning area where that did not, where that use wasn't permitted, it's out.
Well, that's my other concern with this is if people are forced to register their rental properties,
Mhm.
which I'm not saying I'm against. Back to the students, they're all over Emmitsburg. Are we going to force them to put their students out?
I
No-
think.
No, you're going to enforce them to provide a safe place for them to live. That's the goal of this.
Yeah.
So who was it said something about the toilet falling in or whatever? That's the real goal, is to not have a floor that's falling in or a ceiling that's only 6 foot tall and it's really not a bona fide bedroom for somebody to live in.
Well, but I would imagine on the application form, you're gonna probably have to check a box. Is it a boarding house, a rooming house, a student house, or
can check-
single family apartment use? If we're gonna have to identify that, it's gonna come to light.
Mhm.
We're gonna have to be prepared to
Th-
deal with that.
That is
Mhm.
a question. How would you, well, it does come down to voluntary, it's a new requirement if it goes forward. So we're going to rely on them to all the homeowners to actually follow it, which we know how that works with the lead line survey. What do we get? Like 20% participation. But needless to say, how would we know what rentals would constitute student housing? Or are we saying?
You mean rental registrations?
Yeah, like on the rental registration, because I think what Commissioner Turnquist was saying was, well, are we going to put students out? Because we are talking about, what percent, we're saying allow student housing by special exception. Potentially, that's what we're looking
Mhm.
at. Rental registration could potentially show that there's more student housing out there, correct?
Yep.
So how do we, and so is that not what you were asking as far as, we could have, what if,
Well, I think what you're saying is if you find a non-allowable use, then the code would have to be enforced.
Mhm.
right,
And it would come to light, as Ms. Turnquist
So if some,
pointed
so
out.
if somebody's got student housing, renting bedroom or rooms as bedrooms in any area today would be a non-allowable use at the moment.
mhm.
So yes, you'd have to tell them to change the type of rental property they're doing according to the code.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And,
Well,
and then also the same thing for boarding house. So just because it could be a boarding house versus student housing.
Mhm.
but
Which
neither-
are
but
only
ne-
permitted in certain zones.
In the
Right.
village zone, I
So-
believe,
so if you-
right?
so
The
if you
boarding
found-
house and
Right.
rooming house.
So if you find a non-allowable use, then you'd have to address it as per the code.
So is that something that, well,
The first
do
one
we
is not-
have a copy of what the rental application would look like?
No, because we decided that perhaps it might be helpful to figure out what we want to put in it
Okay.
first before coming up with the form.
Okay, because is that something we need to consider putting into it? The rental registration?
I wouldn't put it into an ordinance because requirements can change and then you're going to hamstring yourself. I mean, the point of the registration is to know
Who's renting?
who's renting and what's being rented and whether or not it's a permitted use or whether it's like expanded. Because the goal is, to keep your sister from falling through the bathroom floor.
On the
Right.
toilet, nonetheless.
Right.
Yes. One of the things that I saw in an example, registration from Gettysburg was, so I was looking, I'm trying to read this quickly, Ms. Powell, but,
Mhm.
I can't see without my glasses, hang on. That you, had put in here, like, I can't find it now, about the listing contact information for the owner or whoever is going to be the point of contact. Here we go. I'm sorry. Following information for each rental unit on the application provided by the code enforcement. Address of the unit, number of rentals, name, street, telephone number, and email address of all owners of the dwelling unit. You mean like the property owner? Yeah. Okay. And then the owner of the rental is not the individual, then it has to be, okay, yeah, a representative. But name and address of the landlord or resident agent if applicable. But Gettysburg also had them list the tenants and what unit they were in. So they had, we would have a copy of that information on file too.
So that's not included in the draft ordinance. Trying to walk the line between being too intrusive
Mm-hmm.
versus me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting that that's not a bad idea. It's just not something. I think it's certainly the numbers. Way it's drafted, you can't have more than 2 adults. In that,
Right.
you know, and your minor children that are part of the family unit,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I mean, it's not uncommon to see a couple same-sex kids, you know, sharing a room with bunk beds, whatever.
Right.
You know, so that limitation applies now.
The only thing that scares me about making them notify us every time they lose a tenant is the work that would be on staff. Some of the apartment buildings are pretty quick turnovers. You know, people are only there for 2 months until they don't pay their rent, then they're gone.
Right.
And that's going to put a burden on staff. And the reason to have the owner's information is basically twofold. One is for emergency contacts during the cold spell over the holidays. We had vacant homes that, well, they were college students. I'm not going to tell you that they weren't, that had went home. They had busted water pipes.
Mm-hmm.
We had no idea how to get a hold of the owner.
Right.
So this way we would have that information that we could get. And also, if we have those problem rental properties, we know how to get a hold of the owner to say, hey, you got to come up here. We have a problem. You know, the police have been here 4 times in the last 2 days, and your people just aren't listening. So that's what that part was there for.
Okay, yeah, that makes absolute sense. Would they have to report the number of you, see, I get the terms mixed up. Like, for example, if there were individual bedrooms that are being rented out, they have to report the number of bedrooms as an individual rental unit. Am I saying that term correctly?
I think that would be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
that's correct. And this is something that we can think about too. You know,
Wait. I'm sorry. Can you turn on your microphone?
sorry about that. Is it per dwelling unit? Is it per rental unit? And I think that per rental unit makes sense.
Mhm.
But if you're looking at a commercial apartment building that has, I mean, I don't know how big your biggest apartment building is. I
I have no idea.
Yeah.
either.
25.
Yeah. Well, no, probably schoolhouse is probably 25 units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's something that we could certainly look at, but max occupancy is helpful. But again, this isn't something where code enforcement is going to go knock on a door and say, how many people are in this bedroom?
Right.
But what it does do is allows the town to look at the unit to see if it's safe. And a 5-year turnaround is a pretty reasonable period to make sure that it's safe. And you can also look at max allowable. Like if it is a single family dwelling, you can't rent more than 1 room or whatever it is that, you all think is appropriate, because we do have to look at the underlying zoning requirement. And so once again, your definition of family, it's related by blood or marriage, or up to 5 unrelated people who act as a single housekeeping unit. You'd think I'd have memorized this by now, but. And when you rent a room, unless that person's dining with you and sharing the groceries and other things, they're not part of the family unit. So we do have to think about, well, what does that do to your underlying zoning code? But, for the people that are, renting a single room to a student, to help make ends meet or whatever. This is up to you.
Just kind of walk me through this. So if I want to rent out my house, I have to get it inspected,
Mm-hmm,
apply for the permit.
mm-hmm,
I'd probably have 6 months to bring it up to code.
mm-hmm.
The code would possibly include any current codes on the books or part of the IBC
As currently drafted, that is correct.
other than sprinklers. I wouldn't have
Well,
to put
sprinklers are they're now required.
but I wouldn't have to, that would not be a code violation. If
We
my
would have-
house was built before such and such and such, is that
We would
correct?
have to exclude it.
We would have to exclude it, but any other code, I would have to come up to code within
Mhm.
6 months. I have to pay for that inspection. There was something in here about MDE, that you also had to do something with MDE.
Oh, lead.
For lead.
Yeah, you have to, that's state law.
Yeah.
to register your property, with MDE.
And then who's gonna come out to my house to see if I brought it up to code before approving my rental application?
If it doesn't meet the criteria at the first inspection, somebody will have to go back out and look and
Another inspector,
Mhm.
not somebody from the town, but I have to pay another inspector to come back.
no, this is actually crafted as though a town employee would do the inspection. It's not independently contracted out. The cost of the permit is $25. This is not an onerous tax.
Yeah, oh, I don't know what it costs to have my home inspected by a licensed contractor.
No, that's not
before-
part of the test.
Before I apply for the rental permit, it says I need to have a home inspection. Does it not?
Which is done by a town employee.
That was in the initial draft, to have a licensed, inspector do the inspections. But after doing some research and reading things and talking to Leslie, it would, the inspection, because it is so focused on life safety, would be your code enforcement officer would be conducting the inspections. There's a basic certification class that he can take that then he can do those inspections. So that takes out the cost of a licensed inspector, because we do realize that that cost could be significant. And then depending, you hire one inspector, you hire another one. We all know they look for different things. You get passed, you don't, but you have basically the same thing. So this would create uniformity as well.
So there'd be no fee then.
We're still talking with the mayor over that would there be a basic fee for the inspection itself?
Or a
For,
re-inspection.
or re-inspection. The $25 application fee is just the application and to process the permit. Should there be an additional fee for an inspection or re-inspection? And ultimately, that's the mayor and board's decision. My recommendation would be yes, a nominal fee. But again, that's up to the mayor and the board.
And my gut's telling me no.
Right.
We disagree a couple times a day.
Well,
just so
I
you
mean,
know.
if you think about how many rentals we have and how much time that's going to take away from our staff, that's
Well, the initial will.
the,
Once we get that initial done, then it won't be, I just don't want to cause a burden to the property owners and the citizens. We're already going to be costing them money to bring the place up to register the place and get it up to code and things like that. And we're doing it not as a money grab. We're doing it to make the town safer. That's all.
Have you thought
also
about
do-
stretching it out to where not all of them are done the same year? So you do, if you're doing it every 5 years, you do 20% or whatever a year. Otherwise, you're going to have every 5th year, it's going to be a burden on the town staff to get them all done. And
Yeah,
First
I'm not
inspection,
sure they can
re-inspection.
all get done in a year, the initial.
That's what I was-
And, we concentrate on the big ones in our high hazard, if you want to call them that, our high
Yeah.
hazard apartment buildings, rentals, and then work on the smaller ones as, say, the next year. So you might not have to do it over 5 years, but, for 3
Over
years,
3
it
years or
might be
something.
before we get everybody done.
because
if that makes any sense.
yeah.
I just don't want to put a burden on our citizens. That's all with too many fees. We're going to see enough of those coming from at the state level.
This is also to see who's, how many student housing we have.
This actually
No.
is completely unrelated. This was sort of an inadvertent side effect because, you know, other jurisdictions do have rental registration criteria, and this gives people the opportunity, people, i.e. code enforcement, the opportunity to ensure that the premises, you know, meet code requirements.
code.
Yeah, so that's how it sort of, it was an
See-
evolutionary process.
I know from campaigning over the
Mhm.
years that I've campaigned, I know a lot of single family homes that are now rental units. Or that you wouldn't know would be rental units, but are being rented.
You mean
So
to
that's a lot-
to
you know,
another
that's
single
in That's
family?
in the housing developments, all the housing developments and everywhere. All the housing, I know all the housing developments have rental units in them now,
Sure,
including student housing.
which is the other problem.
Right. And some have a lot.
Mhm.
Well, then that's a problem. Because whatever you decide on, if it violates what you decide on, then that,
But that's what I'm gonna say, would they be thrown out of the, because
I
say,
think
say
that-
Silo Hill has,
you can
25
have a provision that
rental
says the
student
semester's
units.
completed or something. I mean, so that students
would they
aren't
be
impacted.
forced out of their homes or forced out of their, or
Ms. Powell was saying you could say, you know, at the end of the semester or the end of the school year. Instead of like, see you right in the middle of the semester.
yeah, I know, we were talking about the village zone, but I was looking, you know,
Oh, you mean how does student housing apply to the other?
Yeah, so if we do a
Right.
registration, we find there's student housing, in his case in Silo Hill, it's not, you know, it becomes a, well, you can't do that. That's not up to code. We kicking the students out?
right?
No,
Right.
because they have to go and meet the variance requirements. If you opt with the variance approach to life, or special exception, excuse me. If you decide to go with the special exception requirement, then the owner gets a notice, because keep in mind, they're making money on this. It's a
Right.
commercial operation. They get a notice that says, excuse me, you need to file or, you know, seek a variance. It's been a long day.
That's what
A special exception. You need to seek a special exception, and we're going to give you, you know, 45 days to go do it. And then if they ignore you, then they start getting fined.
Are you talking about other zones beside the village zone?
Well, the question was brought up in the context of student housing.
Right, but we're talking about outside of the village zone.
Outside of the village zone?
Well, then
There would be no special exception because
There
it's not,
wouldn't
it's
be.
not a permitted use.
So what will happen?
Then
They
it's
would still
not-
have to register their
they still have
houses.
to register their property, but it doesn't matter if it meets. So students can be people. Right? So if you're renting a house,
or
I
a
mean, one
duplex.
room in a house to a person, it doesn't matter if that person is a student or not.
Right, but if you're renting for 3 or 4 or 5,
So, yeah, because what happens is we wind up with this collision with our whole family definition.
yeah.
Correct me if you're wrong. So Silo Hill would be a different zoning district. So we would have to look at the requirements of that zone to see what's permitted, to see
It's-
what meets the definition, what does not.
That's what
Um,
I was,
I
mean, I'm
can't,
not
I
just
can't
talking
answer
about
that question off at the top of my head.
Yeah,
I
there's-
probably,
It's definitely not
Well, I'm
student
saying-
housing.
no. There's probably student housing, probably in all of our developments, probably, we probably didn't know, but I bet there is students renting somewhere or other people renting somewhere. Even if it's owned by a person that doesn't live there anymore. That was my concern before, because I've had homeowners from while I was campaigning, especially this year, was complaining about
Mhm.
multiple units in the development itself that was, you know, the trash and the noise and all the
Well,
stuff.
then they need
but-
to make a complaint and code enforcement will be out there.
And parking and all that other
Yeah,
stuff.
because you've already got rules for
Well,
that.
yes, what about,
Right, but this is gonna drag it and into light. I mean, I agree with you.
rebel.
It's happening all over the place, but if we put a registration out there and people do admit that they're doing it, and there's no exception for them to allow that use going forward,
will they be thrown out?
It's going to be a nightmare.
But does
That was my
mean that we
concern
should
before. I mean,
not
while we were sitting here talking, I
address
was
it?
listening, and
Yeah, I mean, these are all.
there
really
could be like
important.
25 houses, and I'd say, I'll give you examples how that will. Could be 25 unit, that's the duplexes or the single family. So
There's
Could
some
be
in
students.
Pembroke,
could be
Yep.
students living in them
there's
and
some
then
in
they,
Emmett's Gardens. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
One
I
in
mean-
Southgate.
but that's my concern on this. There's a lot more than you figure there could be.
Are they
they-
violations of their HOA requirements?
Some are, some aren't.
Well, the
So,
HOA
yeah.
needs to step up if it is.
Silo Hill doesn't have an HOA.
No, Silent Hill does.
Well, ultimately, it comes back to the board to decide if you want to allow student housing just as you are in the village zone to address these other developments that do have student housing.
Shit, I mean, I was
Um,
listening when we was discussing just here. I said, well, what about all the other? places?
Right.
Mhm.
Fair point.
I think we need to go back and just look at the code for each of those zones to see what is allowed and what is not allowed.
Because once you
And-
register for rental, they're gonna know.
Correct. Correct. And there are a lot of issues, particularly in Silo Hill, that code enforcement has been addressing.
Right.
But we wouldn't necessarily know if they fill out rental registration, if it's student housing or not. We would just know that it's being rented.
Well, no, they should probably on the application form, check the box that I'm operating a rooming house or a boarding house or a student house or apartment. You need to identify what your rental is.
Yeah, you're renting the house or you're renting a room.
Maybe it would be helpful if we gave you a matrix that said, okay, this is what residentially speaking can be done in the village zone.
Yes,
R1, R2,
Yes.
R4, R5.
that would be great.
Because I think that would help put things in perspective. Because going back to the whole, if you start out with one room and then it becomes two rooms and then your kids move out and you get, two more bedrooms, at a certain point, it's an apartment or a boarding house. And so maybe that's something we should look at. Maybe we should look at the number of units that could be permitted in another zone. And then I'll bring it up anyway. Then there's this whole issue of halfway houses. People that occupy, I know, I shouldn't have gone there. Okay, I'll be quiet. No, but.
We're not being sued.
Yeah, I'm already dealing with that. So, but these are all things to take into account because a lot of these just don't fall within the definition of these owners or these occupants just don't meet the definition of a family.
I did see a sample ordinance that excluded rentals where one bedroom,
Mm-hmm.
like if I'm an owner and I rented out just one bedroom, those were excluded from the rental registration program. And if you look at Frederick City's rental ordinance, I really liked it a lot. It took like a phased in approach.
Mm-hmm.
Like we want people to comply, right? So, okay, homeowner, go ahead, apply for your rental registration. And over the next 5 years, we're going to phase in all of the inspections. So I think it's easier to get people to comply if you put the carrot on the stick and say, hey, we're going to approve your rental registration, but within the next 12 months, 18 months, we're going to come out and inspect your property. If you fail any of the criteria, then you have 6 months to bring it up to code. If I knew that I didn't meet certain codes or that my property needed work, I just wouldn't apply.
Right.
Right. So unless it's going to be a word of mouth, hey, my neighbor's renting to students, can you come and check it out? How are you going to check it out?
Well, that's how we got here in the first place.
Mhm.
Well, that
Because
was that was a complaint.
typically, and these ordinances, it's because somebody notices something is amiss and they make a complaint. That's really, otherwise you'd be in the position of the Uber police, running around all over the place, which is nobody wants to pay the taxes that would be required for that. So you have to pick a reasonable line.
But if somebody doesn't comply and apply for the permit, does the town have authority if they know they're renting? What authority does the town have to pursue that further? If they can they find them
Yep, that's in the.
based on hearsay?
No, there'd be an investigation. And because you have to have a good faith basis to, you know, present a complaint upon somebody. And then we have, if you look at page 4, maybe it's not on page 4, it's on my page 4. Yeah, of the proposed ordinance, there's violations and penalties. And you can see that it's kind of, it varies because, so a failure to register isn't necessarily, I mean, somebody could just mess up and not do it, or, you know, because although people are charged with knowing the law, you know, give them a notice, say, hey, you need to register your property. If they don't do it again, they get a $50. If they allow an occupancy, then you get a bigger fine. But violation of section 8.04.04 are the safety criteria, and those fines are whopping because that's the point.
And 0440 is,
That's the whole list of,
That's safety stuff.
yes, it's the safety stuff, that thou shalt not. Maybe is it, do I have the right section? Oh, no, it should be 830, excuse me. Because the general requirements relating to substandard conditions, you know, failing to provide for a safe path of travel, ingress and egress.
So that should be 8.
Yeah, we should, it should
0.30?
be, yeah, it should be 0.030, but we should also narrow it. So it
Right.
really, though, the big fines really only go to the, you know, dear Lord, how in the heck are you gonna get out of here? Right, the safety criteria, and we can easily do that. Yeah, sorry about that. But, you know, my belief is that, you know, the bigger fines go to the bigger violations.
Is there, I think, is there any reason why we're not doing this yearly?
I think that goes back to the whole staff.
Because I think it would be harder to remember to do it every 5 years versus making it, you know, every year, kind of like your car insurance or something, you know?
Yeah, I think that we came up with 5 years because there was concern that annual registration would have been too onerous.
Mhm.
You know, but again, this is all up to you. And we're just trying to get something on the table for you to consider.
We would put all the properties into a database and, you know, January 1st of 2027, it would spit out the list of properties that are due to be inspected for that year. So we just go off that list. And if you wanted to do it yearly, we would have to hire a person because they wouldn't have time to do anything else. Because you can typically, until they go through and do all the properties and then go back and write the reports and send the reports out, then go back and do the re-inspections.
No, I don't mean an inspection every year. I mean an application every year. And that the,
Registration.
or the registration,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you. But in the
That's
inspection,
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that would do for us. What would that do for us, Amy? I'm missing you.
Change of use. So if I was renting 2 bedrooms and now I'm renting 3.
yeah, or it's been sold and somebody else is now the property owner.
Well, they have to
Sure.
come here anyway for that. So we know, because when they sell something and get a new owner, they have to come in and register
Right.
for water, sewer, the building, all that kind of
Is
stuff.
that
So,
something that we're going to be cross-checking to see if it's also used to be a rental?
That's something that we could add to the application, correct?
so would it need a change of use permit, you're suggesting? If we think it's a single family and it's actually being a boarding house, that would be a change of use occupancy, right?
Absolutely.
So would that require a permit for
That
that?
requires proper zoning.
I was gonna say, if it fits the zoning, you could apply for the permit. If it doesn't fit the zoning,
Then you gotta
then,
stop.
then you would lose that. It would then be a single family or duplex or whatever.
Yeah.
Here again, my intention with being in favor of this is not to become cumbersome to the owner, but it's to make sure that everything in town is safe. Not only for the owners and the occupants of the property, but for the neighbors.
There was, you know, it was Gettysburg. I don't remember. I looked at so many different ones that also said if it was, you know, the inspection would last for so long unless there was like a whole new batch of people that came in, which gets down to the number of tenants. And the only reason why I mentioned that is because if you, even a single family home that's been rented, they could trash the place. And, you know, before the next group comes in.
Then that's the owner's issue, but
It is the owner's issue, but we as a town have issued that rental permit based on that inspection and on previous tenants.
yeah, but the landlord still has his own obligations or her own obligations or its own obligations to inspect properties. I mean, because
Right, but we have examples where they don't. So if I knew I only had to do this every 5 years and the inspection lasts for so long and I get a fresh new batch, where's my incentive as a property owner to make those changes back up to code?
It's almost like buying a used car. When you buy that used car, you're required to have it up so it passes that inspection.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't hold the mechanic that did the inspection hostage 5 years down the road if you're running around on bald tires and say, well, Jim, you inspected it and it was fine. It's your fault. That type of thing. And we can also, I think there's something in here that we can also, if it's, we have a reason to believe that it's not safe,
yeah,
we have the option to go in there. So
That's in here.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah, we
yes.
put it in,
It's in the code.
I-
anyway.
at this point, I don't know where it is.
I don't
It's in
know
the code
either.
Anyway, that we have the right to entry.
Yeah,
For-
and
for-
I
for
will
safety
tell you
issues.
that if somebody says, no, you can't come in. Oh yeah, one of the things I wanted to include in this is that when you register, you are accepting the entry of a code enforcement officer onto your property
Mm-hmm.
because this is a privilege
Mm-hmm.
and otherwise we'd have to go running around getting administrative warrants, which is a real pain in the neck.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too expensive. You don't want to do that.
Well, I do.
But you can if you have to.
Well, no, but knowing how much work it is on staff, I think $25 is a really nominal fee for the amount of work that goes into it and something we should consider an inspection fee perhaps, or because $25 for 5 years, that's $5
Yeah.
a year.
Are we losing money on this?
Yeah. Yes,
Absolutely. So I would be in favor of seeing a slightly higher fee or
Or we could just say that the fees are going to be set through resolution, so you don't have to every single time come back and amend the ordinance.
yes, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Is there nothing currently in our code or Frederick County code that would allow us to enter a property now? If we want to condemn it, like, or if it's unsafe structurally on the outside, do we have any ability to condemn it
You
or
can-
fine
you-
the owner?
Yeah, you can fine, but you do not have a right to entry unless it is granted to you by the property owner. What it does do is gives you the right to seek an administrative warrant.
Okay, so why aren't we doing that for properties that are really bad?
Well, because condemning something is not easy. It's extraordinarily expensive. And if you're condemning it because it is falling apart, and I think we went through this here already.
We did. We can use an example of the Hobbs property.
Yeah.
That was something that was brought, that we wanted to bring to the board to have it condemned by the board, which you do have the authority to by the code. However, you have to meet certain like benchmarks, and we had a structural engineer come in that the town paid for, and he would not say it needs to be condemned. So then we were dead in the water. And we don't have the right to go into anybody's house right now. We have one property in particular that we wish we could get into, but we can't. So this opens the doors to allow you to do a lot more than we have the authority to do right now.
Well, and you can call, I mean, if there's like an imminent concern, you can call the sheriff's department and have them do a safety check or a welfare check, and they will do that.
But we don't have anything in our code about exterior facades and how we can't
Oh,
have
no.
chipping and peeling paint.
You,
and
you've got that.
Are we fining those?
Yes.
Individuals?
Yeah.
But we're
Sometimes a
not
lot.
bringing them into compliance.
Well, it sort of depends on the person, because unfortunately, sometimes the people that don't comply probably need greater assistance than the system is willing to provide.
Very well.
Ultimately, we're at the mercy of the courts. So we have fined 2 properties in particular. And we end up in court and we get a notice to abate, but it's a limited notice to abate. That gives us certain rights to do things. For example, one of the properties where we're allowed to remove the fence, clean up the yard, clear all the debris and all the trash. But unfortunately, it's back in the same state it was when we went through all that years ago. One particular property we took for code and violations for cracking the exterior, and we got a notice to abate, but it was very limited and that was not part of it. So
What about compounding fines? That add consecutively, like with my fence violation, I was gonna get a code violation, a fine every single day until it met the code.
And that is written into your
Yes.
ordinances. It is already there.
So
We had that happen before. Where
if they're
somebody-
getting $100 fine daily, at some point they're gonna clean it up, right?
no,
No,
No.
not
You would be
necessarily.
no,
amazed.
we just had one that the owner had to pay $34,000 in court costs and fees and fines ordered by the court, and he paid it.
And unfortunately, it didn't fix the problem.
I just think it's so important to balance the needs of the town with the rights of the homeowner,
Mhm.
because the last thing I would want if I was renting a house is somebody from the town beating on my door to come in and inspect it. It's a slippery slope.
Well, I understand what you're saying and I kind of agree with you, but the subject that we talked about before, we're doing the same thing. We're saying you can't rent to college kids. But now you're saying, we don't want you to come in, but we're going to tell you who you can rent to. So I get it. I know what you're saying, but you see what we're doing?
Mhm.
Yeah, so.
Well, and there was, I think you had hinted at this before, like some towns who say if the rental is owner occupied and maybe they only rent 1 bedroom or
That
whatever.
could be a requirement for your single family 1-bedroom rule, is that it has to be on your, and actually that's already in your code somewhere.
Has to be owner occupied.
Yeah, for, I think, is it bed and breakfast, Najila? Yeah, that the person actually has to live there.
So, I mean, other towns have, and of course, everybody does it differently, but other towns have said, we'll waive the rental registration fee if it's owner occupied
Mm-hmm.
and you're on, I mean, that's an incentive to encourage owner occupied rentals, but it's something we could, I don't know if that's something we want to consider.
Yeah, I mean, it just comes down to, what we're gonna do to the rest of your ordinances, because every time we change something, there's like some collateral
Yeah.
impact. Yeah, so we just want to do it right.
So where do we go from here as far as the rental registration? It sounds like everybody, for the most part, is in agreement that there should be one.
I'm really strong that there should be one.
Yeah.
I don't want the town losing money. It's costing us more to do a rental registration. It's
think
gotta
it
be,
needs to be higher.
budget neutral.
Then we need to look at that.
Yeah, I do think the fee needs to be higher. I think we need to consider,
Or you need fees for the inspection.
oh, yeah.
Well,
or
it's,
something
it's
like
not
that.
like we're hiring a new person. We're using existing staff and already our code enforcement officer, it doesn't pay for itself. So it's, we don't make enough off parking tickets and fines and things like that to pay for that. That's one of those things you're
But
just,
if you're tripling his workload,
Yeah,
well, you're not going to triple it. It's going to be an increase. It's going to be an increase, but it's not going to be a triple. It's going to be, 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 it's going to be So instead of checking Parker meters 4 times a day, he might only check them 2 times a day, and then we'll be out doing this other work.
It'll
Um,
be substantial at the beginning until we.
Oh, it
get
will be. It
Yeah.
will be. Well, once we get it done that first time, I think it'll drop off dramatically. And we're actually going to have one of our other staff members get trained also, so we don't have only one. In case something would happen, we lose a staff member, or during vacation times, we have a complaint, somebody can go address that. Yeah, what scares me again is all these fees coming down from the state level that we don't jump on board and hurt people, because they're coming.
But
Yeah.
They're coming.
we, as Ms. Powell said, this is a business. Some of these are going to be pulling in $1,000 a bedroom, so it's $25 for 5 years.
Well, we're not talking student housing now. A lot of these are just rental properties that are, getting, sure, they're probably getting $1,000 an apartment. But,
More than that, yeah.
my rental property, I'm getting $750 for one and $1,000 for the other, and I'm breaking even because at this time of the economy and things, that's all we want to do is break even. We haven't raised our rent in years. Because of what people are suffering through. So we're not making money renting at $1,000 an apartment or a business.
I don't know. Board members, are anybody else looking at increasing the initial application or registration fee? Or do we leave it at 25 for 5 years? I mean, that's $5 a year, Mr. Mayor.
Now, I would think 3 years, because I've seen a lot in doing the research back. I saw a lot of 3-year registration periods. I mean, I wouldn't be in favor of every year. I think that just becomes cumbersome.
3
So it's-
years is a good compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think $100 application fee is unreasonable. I mean, if you're a landlord, you're getting income from renting the property. I think that's going to be the least of everyone's concerns, because if there's violation, or they need to bring violations, or they need to bring it up to code, they could very well pass that on to the tenants. So
That's per unit, correct? So if you have a 22, it's not per unit?
Per building.
Per
property, right?
dwelling unit.
Per property, right?
And I don't know, maybe 100's not enough. Maybe it's too much.
So the way it's written, it's $25 per dwelling unit and $10 per each rental unit in the dwelling unit. So if you have a building that has 10 units, you'd pay $25 for the dwelling unit, correct?
Correct.
And then $10 for each unit.
Should be 125.
Okay.
10
So,
units.
so a single family would be 25, would be the only one at $25.
Yeah, it would just be 25. I
Right.
mean, and if you're looking at cost covering,
That sounds a bit. better, yeah.
maybe what you do is that if it doesn't pass inspection, they pay for the second inspection. I mean, there are all kinds of ways to look at trying to make this a little bit more cost neutral.
I would like to explore that and see what options we have.
Since I now know that it's 25 for the main unit and then $10 or
Per
Per-
rental unit.
per additional rental. So one rental is $25 and every additional rental on the same property is an additional 10.
So per bedroom.
Well,
Yeah, well,
Whether
that-
whether
whether
individual
it's
rentals.
bedroom or whether it's
I mean, if it's just one
like
house,
school, like
If
school
it's
has
one
apartments,
house
then
with
you're getting
multiple bedrooms, is that
$25.
$25
yeah,
total?
it's whatever you guys decide on.
Well, if
As
it's
long
one,
as
ha-
it's being rented to a
One person.
one per-
family as defined in your code.
If you rented your house, just your house to another family, then it'd be $25 only for that
Family
because it's a
section.
single family.
Right,
But if somebody was renting
which is consistent with your
Uh,
zoning code.
a single family house that's been converted, first floor, one apartment, second floor, another apartment, total price is $35.
No, wouldn't that be?
My building would,
$5.
my building would be $45,
would-
25 for the building, and then
10
$10 for the
unit.
first floor, $10 for the second floor.
Yeah. So the building itself would be 25
25, 10 and 10.
because there's
35,
2
45.
units inside.
But you had 2 apartments.
Mhm.
Well, storefront and then an apartment.
Okay.
Well, except this
Right.
doesn't apply to commercial, let's be clear. This doesn't apply to commercial properties. The registration only applies to residential properties.
Okay.
Oh, wow, I'm making money. I'm
There
down
you
to
go.
$35.
We have saved you $10.
We had the check wrote out.
I guess where we are now is that, we just, we'll provide you the matrix. I think that's going to be very helpful.
Sure.
Because chances are you've got a whole lot of people violating the current zoning code for single family dwellings.
Mhm.
A whole lot.
Yep.
I do have a question for you. Is there a percentage that you would be okay with student housing throughout the whole town? Because it's out there. I'm not gonna lie to you, Silo Hill will go half empty. It will be empty.
That was my concern when I brought it up.
Mhm.
They're gonna throw them all out on
lived
the
there
street or.
Yeah, Silo Hill will be half empty.
I don't like the percentage thing only because it could all be at Silo Hill and none be anywhere else.
Are we
I think-
talking about student housing or just rental in general?
Well, student housing and, nothing we can really do about rental in general, but the student housing thing, because we're working on two different things.
Yeah, if you're talking about student housing, I don't like the percentage only because it's.
Because the
it could-
village,
It could be very dense in one area because it's a percentage number and have nothing anywhere else because the percentage is all here.
Mhm.
there is
I
probably
think the
less
distance
student
between-
housing in the village zone than there is any place in town.
Well,
You're
even
probably
if we
right.
did the
You're probably right.
distance, it would, even if we did distance, which I agree with that. I mean, you would still knock a few out up in Silo Hill,
You will, but
but yeah.
if they're renting them as student housing,
Mhm.
4 or 5, 6 bedrooms.
Right. Maybe
They
that's
would.
an incentive to ask for the
Unless it's just
exception
called an
because
apartment.
they're there first. You know
You
what I
know,
mean?
well, when the inspector goes to the house, he's gonna know.
Yeah.
I'll just say if we did come to an agreement on the rental registration program first, let people register their properties, phase in the inspections over a 5-year period or 3 or 18 months, whatever. To bring those properties up to code, we would know how many students we have in town,
Mhm.
how many boarding houses, and then maybe we could craft a policy for student housing around those figures. Like maybe we'll think, God, we're already at capacity for student housing. The town's, I don't know, 50% student housing. But knowing the numbers in advance would allow us to craft the policy that's not going to displace a lot of students potentially.
No, all I was gonna say is I do think we can move forward with rental registration. That's the first piece of the puzzle. But now go ahead.
What I was going to ask is, do we sitting here today have any idea what the student resident population is within the city limits?
I would guess 100 students.
That's not a big number.
I think you're low.
I think you're low too.
The Mount should have some sort of number. They know
No
how
more than
many
150.
students live off campus.
And maybe that's something we ask them out if we're going, like, if they have numbers on that.
They do not. We have asked them for other reasons.
They've got on campus and
Yeah,
off campus.
On campus, and they have no idea where their off-campus students live.
Yeah, but what we could
Just
do
all.
is say, how many dorm rooms do you have?
Yep.
Well, the problem is they have a big commuting
But they should.
from
know.
the Frederick area, and they have a.
They will know because they have an economic engine going for themselves. In higher education, they know.
They just won't
on
share it
s-
with us.
Well.
Yeah, 'cause
we
we've
can-
asked them
we're gonna-
1,000
we're
we've
gonna
asked them a
ask
lot.
I mean,
nicely.
that's the whole point. It goes back to being a good partner. So if we're not going to get cooperation from Mount St. Mary's, then what is our incentive to move forward with student housing? That's all I'm saying, because we're doing them a favor.
Well, I guess the one thing is we gotta look and see what our options are gonna be if we don't have student housing. Do we end up with less desirable?
Keep status quo.
Yes.
Well, I mean, part of the problem is legislation frequently comes about because of the lowest common denominator, right? the worst behavior, and we can only legislate to a certain extent. And then after that, you look at your other code provisions for the other violations and you address it that way. Because landlords will have self-interest in maintaining, or at least most of them, their investments. You know, so as long as everybody's commercial interests are aligned, that helps a lot.
I'll try to take a survey tomorrow around town to find out. I'm not going to be 100%, but I think I can get within 90% of how many properties are rented to students. It'll help a little bit.
In the village zone or everywhere?
The whole town,
Oh,
the whole town.
you can count Southgate as one.
One, yes, I know exactly where it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That, I'll
Yeah.
give you that neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think there's only like 2 or 3 out in Pembroke, maybe 4.
Two that I'm aware of.
2 that you're aware of.
But there could be more.
Yeah. I can find them. Anytime you see a cars in the driveway with
So,
different states, that's, yeah, they got you. I got you.
North Seaton. Okay.
The past inspector, I mean, Commissioner Joe.
Oh,
Beside
oh,
Joe.
oh, okay, yeah. Do we need direction for rental registration?
We're going to come back with matrix,
Mhm.
and we're going to look at how these proposals affect the current existing zoning, and if we're doing violence to your current zoning, and whether or not you want to consider making any exceptions within the single-family dwelling unit world, because it sounds like there's a lot of single-family, or at least some, we shall not say a lot, we shall say some, single-family dwelling units that are renting out a room. And if you want to allow that in a zone like an R1, R2, or whatever zone, we can craft it so that it has to be owner occupied and there can't be more than one.
I
I mean, I don't know what else to do.
I think that that's a good option. I would like to see what that looks
Okay.
like. Absolutely. I would also like to entertain or look at an option for changing it for every 5 years and whether or not we want to keep it with the $25 fee or not. Of course, that isn't you just sitting there brainstorming. I guess that's a decision.
It's
that
an
you're-
economic decision. I
Yeah.
mean, there, you could have an annual registration just so you keep track of how many people are living in any unit. But I kind of liked Commissioner Hagan's 3-year idea. I thought
Mhm.
that made sense with maybe an adjustment in the fee.
Yeah, I agree.
Najila and I and Kathy can brainstorm it
Sure.
and come back with the matrix and some, you know, it won't necessarily be the same cafeteria options, but
Yeah.
you know, some options for you to look at, and then at least you'll be able to understand what the consequences are on your other zoning criteria.
Well, on the comp plan, Nijila, you had it broken down by like, people or how many rentals versus I don't know what's
Oh,
the opposite of rental?
I
Owner occupied.
don't know if I c- That's all census data from like
Census data.
2020, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's another source.
So it gave you specific properties though?
No, it.
Oh, it didn't, just a percentage.
Yeah.
Well, hot darn. Okay, I
Yeah.
tried. All right, are there any other direction we need to give town staff?
If you come up with something along the way, if you think of something again, just shoot the email to Kathy and Najila and we'll
Okay.
look at them before the next workshop.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Any? eh, Did we lose you, Cliff?
No, I was thinking. The
Every 2
rental-
years.
If the rental thing goes through, we'll be able to keep, we would know more of our population we have here in town. And a
Yes.
more accurate account, like for census stuff, because I think we have census coming up soon. We would know how many's in our town, close to know how many's extras in the town than we thought would be here.
Yeah, I was
thought
gonna
it
say you
was-
get it, the census, the US Census is done every 10 years
Right,
and
it was 2016 was done.
20.
Was it 20?
Yeah,
Oh, I thought it
Yeah.
was 16. I'm
yeah, it's
sorry.
by decade.
My fault. I thought it was 16. I thought it was coming up next year.
Well, and they don't, only certain property owners, it's sort of random,
Yeah.
get the more detailed questions on the census forms. And who knows if people are answering them. I mean, maybe like the whole lead pipe thing.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
So,
that's for sure. All right,
all right, we have a plan.
we have a plan.
Real quick before we close, Saturday at 10 a.m., there is going to be a ribbon cutting at number 1135 5 East Main Street, where the Gettysburg Smoothies were.
Oh, yeah.
We have a new shop going in there called Old Line Leather Lids.
Oh,
So don't get excited about it because it's a fire helmet restoration little sale thing.
oh,
So
that's neat.
yeah, so you guys are all excited,
Huh?
but it's starting out as restoring fire helmets, and there's a big business for that, believe it or not. But they're going to expand their store to sell other items eventually. But it's a matter of fact, as far as I know, it's the only one in Frederick County.
Oh, very cool.
So if you all would like to be there, it'll be short and sweet, but
All right,
Saturday 10.
Saturday at
Yep.
10. Yeah, and I know it's out of town limits, but North Supply Company up where the old Zergables is really cute gift store. If you haven't been, it's really cute. It's really cute. They had a flower bar where you could choose your own. Okay, that's for later. But anyways, it was cute, worth visiting. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? Oh, gosh. Do we have to do that at a workshop? I guess so.
I would do it since the agenda for March 3rd has changed.
Okay, let's
Um,
break that out.
So what has not changed, you have administrative business for the discussion related to the EV charging stations. For consent, you have the filing of the 2024 Annual Planning Commission report. For consideration, appoint Silas, how do you pronounce his name? Do you know? Baoki? I don't know. To the Sustainable Communities Work Group. For consideration, appoint Silas Bioke as an alternate on the Planning Commission with a term of March 3rd, 2024 to March 3rd, 2029. I'm assuming we're going to withdraw the public hearing for the student housing ordinance. So we'll withdraw that. So-
Someone for consent. Mr. Miller. His wife resigned, but he's staying, his term is up this month. So you'll have to be put on March 3rd.
do you know his first name?
Marty.
Marty, okay. Okay, so we can add that as well. So for agenda items for March 3rd, I would have for consideration approval of ordinance 2503, amending town code to establish a rental registration program. Number 3, for consideration approval of FY 24 budget transfers. I have number 4 for discussion ordinance 2504, water and sewer connection fees. Now I remember what I want to ask you about, Leslie. It was about the ordinance on the water and sewer connection fees.
Yeah, do we have data? Sorry, do we have data yet from your engineers? Because they were going to assist with some calculations.
No, this is different.
Oh, sorry. Oh, this is the whole fee.
This is the whole
structure.
shebang.
Okay, then we have to
Um,
comply with state law again.
So I sent a draft to you.
Yeah, Clark's working on it.
Okay, all right.
That's why you got the blank look.
Okay. And then number 5, to do what Commissioner Sweeney wanted for consideration approval of ordinance 2505 to change the time for Parks and Recreation Committee meetings. That's all I have. I just wanted to update it.
Kathy, did you put the rental registration on the March agenda or not? I
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
As an
Just-
ordinance or as a workshop?
I did it as an ordinance, but it can still be just discussion.
Okay. Yeah, because I think there will be more.
Right, there can be, I can make it for discussion and consideration.
Yeah.
In the off chance.
Discussion and or consideration? All right, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I so moved.
Thank you.
March 3rd,
For March 3rd,
as amended.
as amended.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion carries 5-0. And then is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Well, everybody just said that at the same time.
I'll second.
Wonder why.
All right, so I will go with Commissioner Hagan, and then Commissioner Sweeney. Any other further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned at 9:25 PM.